Millionaire freezes when he sees a girl with a birthmark like his. Boy, are you my father? Could a little girl asking, "Are you my father?" completely unravel a lonely millionaire's life? Prepare for the shocking truth. She is his daughter, deliberately hidden for years by his treacherous uncle who is secretly plotting with organized crime to steal the entire family company. Like, subscribe, and listen now to discover how a birthmark exposed a massive conspiracy. The noise and forced gaiety of the elementary school fundraiser faded into a dull roar in Blake Anderson's ears. He stood frozen near the overflowing bake sale table, his hand tightening around the stem of a plastic cup filled with lukewarm punch. Across the crowded gymnasium, amidst laughing children and chatting parents, his eyes had snagged on a little girl with a cascade of brown curls, maybe 10 years old, her face alight with laughter as she spoke to a teacher. It wasn't just her bright energy that held him captive. It was the small, distinct mark visible on the side of her neck as she turned a tiny, perfectly formed star-shaped birthmark. Blake's breath hitched. His own hand instinctively went to the spot beneath his shirt collar, where an identical mark lay hidden, a unique family trait he hadn't seen on anyone but himself since Anna. Images flooded his mind, Anna's laughing eyes, the scent of turpentine in her art studio, the sharp, sudden pain of her unexplained disappearance years ago. Could it be possible? As if sensing his intense gaze, the little girl looked over. Her eyes widened slightly, perhaps noticing his fixed stare. Then, with the unself-conscious curiosity of childhood, she detached herself from the teacher and skipped towards him, weaving through the adult legs. She stopped directly in front of him, tilting her head. "Excuse me, mister," she said, her voice clear and bright. She pointed toward the displayed event program featuring sponsor photos, including his own corporate headshot. "I saw your picture. You have a star too, right? Hidden." She gestured towards her own neck, then looked up at him, her expression suddenly serious, her eyes wide with an almost impossible question. Are you my father?" The innocent words struck Blake with the force of a physical blow. The gymnasium seemed to tilt, the noise receding further. He stared down at the girl, at the undeniable mark on her neck, a mirror of his own, and felt a powerful, staggering wave of emotion, shock, disbelief, and a fierce, burgeoning hope that cracked through the lonely facade he'd maintained for years. He couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, caught in the sudden, earth-shattering gravity of her question. Blake Anderson, 36, was the epitome of Austin Tech success. As the founder and CEO of Anderson Tech, a pioneering company in sustainable energy solutions, he commanded boardrooms, navigated complex international deals, and lived a life surrounded by wealth and innovation. Yet, beneath the polished surface of the young billionaire, Blake was profoundly lonely. His success felt hollow, haunted by the ghost of a past love and the unanswered questions she left behind. 10 years ago, during a tumultuous period after dropping out of college to launch his first startup, he'd fallen deeply in love with Anna, a free-spirited, passionate artist whose vibrant energy was the antithesis of his focused ambition. Their relationship was intense, brief, and ended abruptly when Anna vanished without a word, leaving only a cryptic note saying she needed space. Blake, heartbroken and confused, had poured all his energy into building his company, using work as a shield against the unresolved pain. He never saw or heard from her again. His parents had died in a plane crash when he was young, leaving him under the guardianship of his father's younger brother, Harold Anderson. Harold, a stern, seemingly pragmatic investment manager, had overseen Blake's considerable inheritance and trust fund until Blake came of age. While outwardly maintaining familial duty, Harold always seemed to carry a subtle air of resentment towards Blake's natural brilliance and eventual staggering success, often making passive-aggressive remarks about Blake's luck or irresponsibility despite Anderson Tech's achievements. Blake kept a polite distance from his uncle, sensing a coldness beneath the propriety, but never suspected outright malice. Blake carried his own secret, usually concealed beneath his shirt collar. The small, star-shaped birthmark, a unique hereditary trait passed down the Anderson line. He hadn't thought much about it in years, until that moment in the school gymnasium. The charity event was a typical obligation. Anderson Tech was a major sponsor of STEM programs in Austin schools. Blake usually made a brief appearance, posed for photos, and left quickly, uncomfortable with crowds and small talk. He hadn't expected the event at Willow Creek Elementary, a name shared, coincidentally, with the fictional town and other source materials used here for Austin, to be any different. He certainly hadn't expected to see a ghost in the form of a birthmark on a laughing child, a child whose existence might rewrite his entire past and force him to confront the carefully constructed walls around his heart. The polished world of tech billions suddenly felt incredibly fragile, threatened by the innocent question of a 10-year-old girl. "Are you my father?" The question hung in the air, a fragile bubble in the noisy gymnasium. Blake struggled to find his voice, his mind racing. The resemblance wasn't just the birthmark. Looking closely now, he saw hints of Anna in the girl's expressive eyes, the curve of her smile. He knelt slowly, bringing himself down to her level, his gaze locked on the star-shaped mark. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Madison," she replied readily. "My mom's name was Anna. She was an artist. She died when I was little." Anna. Madison. The pieces slammed into place with breathtaking certainty. This was Anna's daughter. His daughter? The possibility, the sheer, overwhelming probability, sent a tremor through him. "Madison," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That birthmark, I have one just like it." He pulled his collar aside slightly, revealing the identical mark. Madison's eyes widened further, a mixture of awe and confusion dawning on her face. "Wow," Mom said. "She said my dad had one too. She said maybe someday." Her voice trailed off. Blake felt a fierce surge of protectiveness, followed by a cold wave of anger. Anna had known. She must have known Madison was his. Why hadn't she told him? Why had she disappeared? And why was this child, his child, apparently living without him, possibly in foster care, given the school event context? "Madison," he said again, trying to keep his voice calm, gentle, despite the storm inside him. "I knew your mother, Anna, a long time ago." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It's possible. About me being your father. It's very possible." He saw the hope flare in her eyes and knew he couldn't leave it there. "Can you tell me who you live with now? Who takes care of you?" Before Madison could answer, a stern-looking woman, likely a foster parent or caseworker, approached, gently guiding Madison away, giving Blake a wary look. But the connection had been made, the question asked. Blake stood up, his legs unsteady. The noise of the fundraiser returned, but it sounded distant, meaningless. His world had irrevocably shifted. His initial goal formed with absolute clarity: find out the truth. Confirm Madison was his daughter. Understand what happened to Anna, why she never reached him. And, if Madison was truly his, find a way to be her father. His immediate reaction was a chaotic blend of shock, nascent joy, grief for Anna, and simmering anger at the lost years, the unanswered questions. He excused himself abruptly from the event, his mind already racing. He needed help. He needed answers. He pulled out his phone, his fingers dialing a familiar number: Isabel Rossi, his old college friend, now a sharp investigative journalist, known for digging up truths others wanted buried. "Izzy," he said when she answered, his voice tight, "I need your help. Urgently. It's about Anna and a little girl with a star on her neck." The investigation had begun. Isabel Rossi, intrigued by the urgency in Blake's voice and the mention of Anna, agreed immediately. Blake gave her every detail he remembered about Anna, her last known address, friends they shared back then, anything that might provide a starting point. Isabel, with her journalistic resources and knack for navigating databases and public records, started digging. Within days, she uncovered the heartbreaking truth. Anna had indeed passed away nearly 4 years ago from complications related to lupus, an illness she had likely hidden during her brief, intense relationship with Blake. She had moved to a smaller town outside Austin shortly after disappearing from Blake's life, trying to manage her illness while raising Madison alone. Records showed Madison had been placed in foster care after Anna's death, as Anna had no immediate family nearby. Most crucially, Isabel found evidence confirming Blake's suspicions about communication. A former neighbor of Anna's recalled Anna frequently mentioning writing letters to Madison's father, a tech guy named Blake she'd known in Austin, telling him about their daughter, hoping he would step up if anything happened to her. The neighbor remembered Anna mailing multiple letters, growing increasingly distressed when she received no response. Isabel also managed to track down digital footprints emails Anna had sent to an old university address Blake hadn't used in years, bouncing back undelivered. But the physical letters sent to his known business address or family home, they had vanished. Suspicion immediately fell on Harold Anderson. During the period Anna would have been writing shortly after Madison's birth, and in the years following, Harold still held significant influence over Blake's affairs, managing residual aspects of his inheritance and often screening mail and calls at the family estate Blake rarely visited. The implication was chilling. Harold had likely intercepted and destroyed Anna's letters, deliberately keeping Blake ignorant of his daughter's existence. Why? The answers seemed tied to control, perhaps ensuring Blake remained focused solely on the company. Harold still seemed to resent him for building so successfully without his guidance. Armed with this information, Blake, working through his lawyer David Lee, formally petitioned the family court and CPS for paternity testing and supervised visitation with Madison. The process was slow, bureaucratic, but Blake pursued it with quiet determination. The initial supervised visits were awkward, but filled with a tentative magic. Madison was bright, curious, and possessed an artistic streak that reminded Blake painfully of Anna. She peppered him with questions about her mother, questions Blake answered as gently and honestly as he could. A fragile bond began to form, built on shared grief for Anna and the dawning recognition of their connection. The main complication, however, remained Harold. Blake confronted his uncle, presenting Isabel's findings about the likely intercepted letters. Harold flatly denied everything, affecting wounded pride. "Letters? Don't be absurd, Blake. If this woman Anna tried to contact you, I certainly never saw anything. Perhaps she never actually sent them? Or perhaps," his voice took on a sly, insinuating tone, "she was just another gold digger trying to trap you and thought better of it." His smooth denial, his attempt to poison Anna's memory, only solidified Blake's conviction of his uncle's treachery. The battle lines were being drawn, not just for Madison, but over the truth of the past. The stakes grew heavier. Could Blake prove Harold's interference and build a future with his daughter, or would his uncle find a way to keep them apart permanently? Just as Blake felt he was making progress, building trust with Madison and navigating the legal channels for paternity confirmation, Harold Anderson dropped a bombshell that turned the personal quest into a public spectacle. Harold filed a formal petition with the family court seeking permanent guardianship of Madison himself. The petition was a masterpiece of calculated malice. It painted Blake as an unstable, work-obsessed playboy billionaire, utterly unfit for fatherhood, citing fabricated incidents and twisting Blake's known penchant for privacy into evidence of secretive, irresponsible behavior. It portrayed Harold as the stable, concerned relative, stepping in to protect his poor orphan grandniece from a father who had clearly abandoned her mother years ago and showed only sudden, opportunistic interest now. Simultaneously, Harold launched a brutal media campaign. Anonymous sources fed salacious, largely untrue stories to gossip blogs and even some mainstream outlets. Blake Anderson, tech mogul, embroiled in custody battle over love child he ignored for years. Questions raised about his suitability as a guardian. Hints of past scandals, conveniently unverifiable, resurfacing. The narrative Harold spun was toxic. Blake the irresponsible tycoon versus Harold the concerned, stable uncle. Public opinion, easily swayed by headlines and lacking context, began to turn against Blake. Anderson Tech's stock even took a minor hit amidst the negative press. This aggressive, public attack was the turning point. Harold wasn't just trying to obstruct Blake. He was actively trying to destroy his reputation and legally seize control of Madison. Blake realized with chilling certainty that his uncle's motives went far beyond simple resentment or keeping Blake unencumbered. Harold wanted Madison for a reason, perhaps as leverage, perhaps as a means to control Blake's inheritance or company shares through guardianship. The fight was no longer just about establishing paternity and connection. It was a full-blown war for his daughter and against his uncle's malicious agenda. Blake's goal shifted dramatically. He had to not only prove paternity and win custody, but also dismantle Harold's lies, expose his uncle's true motives, and protect Madison from being used as a pawn. His reaction was a surge of cold, focused anger. The gloves were off. He instructed David Lee to fight the guardianship petition with every legal tool available. He asked Isabel Rossi to redouble her efforts, digging deeper into Harold's finances, his business dealings, anything that might reveal why he was suddenly so desperate to control Madison and discredit Blake. He also made a crucial personal decision. Despite the media storm and legal battles, he prioritized his supervised visits with Madison, determined to show her, through consistent presence and quiet affection, that he was there for her, regardless of what the world was saying. He knew he couldn't go back to his old, emotionally guarded life. Winning custody of Madison, protecting her from Harold, had become the single most important objective in his life, eclipsing even the demands of his company. The point of no return had been crossed. He was all in, ready to fight his own family for the sake of the daughter he had just found. The legal battle consumed Blake's life. Depositions, psychological evaluations, endless motions filed by Harold's aggressive legal team. It was a draining, ugly process designed to wear him down and paint him in the worst possible light. Harold's lawyers highlighted Blake's demanding CEO schedule, his lack of parenting experience, even twisted his grief over Anna into evidence of emotional instability. Blake, guided by David Lee, countered patiently, emphasizing his stable resources, his commitment to providing Madison with a loving home, and submitting to every evaluation required by the court. During their supervised visits, Blake focused solely on Madison, shielding her as much as possible from the conflict swirling around them. They talked about Anna, looked at old photos Blake had unearthed, discovered shared interests, a love for science museums, a knack for drawing. Madison, despite her age, seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of the situation, often reaching for Blake's hand during tense moments or whispering, "I know he's lying, Daddy. Uncle Harold is mean." Her quiet trust was Blake's anchor. Meanwhile, Isabel Rossi's investigation into Harold Anderson began yielding disturbing results. Following financial trails proved difficult. Harold was meticulous, using layers of trusts and offshore accounts. But Isabel discovered whispers, connections Harold had cultivated over years with less than reputable figures on the fringes of international finance. And then she found it, a pattern of communication heavily encrypted between Harold and known intermediaries linked to the notorious Black Widow crime syndicate. Isabel brought her findings to Blake and David Lee, her expression grim. "Blake, this is bigger than just family resentment or controlling your inheritance. Harold seems to be involved with Black Widow, specifically with Marcus Thorne. Using the name from the previous story, assuming a linked criminal universe, or just reusing a suitable name. It looks like they have some kind of deal. Why would Harold, a wealthy investment manager, be involved with organized crime?" The pieces started to connect. Anderson Tech wasn't just successful. It held valuable patents in secure data transmission and encryption technology, potentially very useful for laundering money or facilitating illicit communication, the hallmarks of Black Widow's operations. Their theory sharpened. Harold wasn't just after Blake's personal fortune. He was conspiring with Marcus Thorne and Black Widow to seize control of Anderson Tech itself. Gaining guardianship of Madison, Blake's only known heir, might be part of a complex legal strategy to eventually control Blake's controlling shares in the company, especially if Blake were somehow incapacitated or legally stripped of his parental/corporate rights. Harold's smear campaign wasn't just about the custody battle. It was about undermining Blake's fitness to lead his own company, paving the way for a hostile takeover facilitated by Black Widow's influence and funding. This revelation shifted their strategy entirely. They weren't just fighting a custody battle anymore. They were fighting organized crime infiltrating Blake's company through his own uncle. They needed concrete proof of the conspiracy to present not only in family court, but potentially to federal authorities. Isabel intensified her efforts to breach Harold's encrypted communications, perhaps using ethical hacking techniques through legal channels opened by David Lee based on suspicion of criminal activity impacting the custody case. David Lee began preparing a strategy to introduce evidence of Harold's criminal ties into the custody hearing, arguing it directly impacted his fitness as a potential guardian. The regrouping involved coordinating legal strategy with investigative journalism, preparing for a multi-front battle. Their new goal: win custody by exposing Harold not just as a liar, but as a dangerous criminal conspiring with a major crime syndicate to steal Anderson Tech, using his own grandniece as collateral. The stakes were now impossibly high, involving not just family, but corporate security and organized crime. The final weeks leading up to the custody hearing were a crucible. Harold, perhaps sensing Blake's team was closing in, became more desperate. He filed emergency motions trying to block Blake's visits with Madison, alleging Blake was emotionally manipulating her. He leaked more damaging and false stories to the press. His lawyers employed every delaying tactic imaginable. Isabel Rossi, working nearly round the clock with cybersecurity consultants authorized by David Lee's legal maneuvers, finally breached a layer of Harold's encrypted communications. They found fragmented but damning emails between Harold Anderson and Marcus Thorne. The messages confirmed the conspiracy. Harold would use the custody battle and smear campaign to destabilize Blake, making Anderson Tech vulnerable. Once Harold gained control, either via guardianship or by forcing Blake out, he would facilitate Black Widow's access to the company's infrastructure for laundering money and potentially stealing proprietary technology, in exchange for erasing Harold's massive hidden gambling debts and securing him a lucrative position in the new structure. One email explicitly stated, "The girl is the key. Use her to break him." Black Widow requires control of Anderson Tech by year-end. While the legal team prepared this explosive evidence, Madison herself provided another crucial piece. During a visit with Blake at a supervised center, she shyly produced a worn, slightly water-damaged shoebox she'd found tucked away in the closet at her foster home, a box containing keepsakes her mother had left. Inside, beneath dried flowers and faded photographs, were copies of several letters Anna had written to Blake years ago, along with a simple, notarized statement declaring Blake Anderson as Madison's biological father. Anna had clearly tried multiple avenues, creating backups. Madison, with wisdom beyond her years, had recognized their importance. "Mommy wanted you to know, Daddy," she whispered, handing the box to Blake. These letters were emotional dynamite, irrefutable proof of Anna's attempts to contact Blake and Harold's deliberate interference. David Lee immediately filed them with the court. Harold's team, likely alerted to the existence of the letters through court filings, made one last, desperate move. They produced a surprise witness, a former disgruntled Anderson Tech employee prepared to testify, falsely, that Blake had engaged in unethical business practices and harbored a secret gambling addiction, painting him as unstable. David Lee suspected bribery or coercion orchestrated by Harold. This felt like the Dark Knight. Despite the evidence they held against Harold, the last-minute witness and the ongoing public smear campaign created uncertainty. Could they definitively disprove the lies? Could they ensure the judge saw through Harold's manipulations? Blake felt the immense pressure. The thought of losing Madison, of failing Anna, of seeing his company fall into criminal hands, was almost unbearable. He spent hours reviewing the evidence with David and Isabel, preparing his own testimony, steeling himself for the final confrontation in court, where everything his daughter, his company, his future hung in the balance. The courtroom was packed: lawyers, social workers, foster parents, Harold Anderson looking smug, Blake Anderson looking composed but tense, Isabel Rossi and David Lee flanking him, and members of the press eager for the next chapter in the scandalous saga. Madison was present in a separate waiting room with a child advocate, awaiting the judge's decision. Harold's lawyer presented their case first, calling the disgruntled ex-employee who delivered a performance filled with vague accusations and manufactured outrage about Blake's alleged instability. It was slick, designed to sow doubt. Then, David Lee began Blake's defense. He systematically dismantled the ex-employee's testimony, presenting evidence of the witness's own prior misconduct and potential motive for perjury, evidence Isabel had quickly uncovered. He then presented Anna's letters, their authenticity verified, demonstrating her clear intent for Blake to know about Madison. The emotional weight of the letters silenced the courtroom. The tide turned decisively when David Lee called Isabel Rossi, who, under oath, detailed her investigation into Harold Anderson's finances, culminating in the presentation of the encrypted emails linking him directly to Marcus Thorne and the Black Widow conspiracy to seize Anderson Tech using Madison as leverage. Gasps filled the room as the emails detailing the plot, "The girl is the key. Use her to break him," were displayed on courtroom monitors. Finally, Blake took the stand. He spoke not as a CEO, but as a father. He acknowledged his past grief, his regret over losing Anna, but his focus was unwavering. "For 10 years," he said, his voice thick with emotion but steady, addressing the judge directly, "I didn't know Madison existed, thanks to my uncle's deliberate deception. Now that I know her, nothing else matters more. He paused, taking a deep breath. Your Honor, Harold Anderson wants control of my company through guardianship of my daughter. But if I have to choose between Anderson Tech and Madison, there is no choice. I would walk away from my company today, give it all up if it means I could be the father my daughter needs and deserves. His raw honesty, his willingness to sacrifice his empire for his child, resonated powerfully. Just as Harold started shouting objections, lies, he's manipulating you all. Another figure stood up hesitantly from the back of the courtroom, a senior accountant from Anderson Tech. Your Honor, the accountant said nervously, Mr. Lee contacted me. I can corroborate the financial transfers. Mr. Harold Anderson forced me to process wires to shell companies I now know are linked to Black Widow. That was the final nail. Police officers, present in the courtroom after being briefed by David Lee and Isabel on the criminal evidence, moved towards a stunned Harold Anderson. He was arrested on the spot for fraud, conspiracy, and witness tampering. The custody battle was over, the corporate conspiracy exposed. Blake had won. Harold Anderson's arrest and subsequent conviction dismantled his web of deceit. The evidence presented in court also triggered a wider federal investigation into Marcus Thorne and the Black Widow Syndicate, leading to further arrests and disruptions within the criminal organization, though Thorne himself remained elusive. Anderson Tech's board, horrified by Harold's betrayal, fully supported Blake, though the scandal required careful navigation. Blake was granted full, unconditional custody of Madison. True to his word in court, his priorities shifted dramatically. While ensuring Anderson Tech was stabilized under trusted leadership, perhaps appointing a capable interim CEO, Blake stepped back from the intense day-to-day demands of running the company. He sold his large, impersonal city house and bought a smaller, comfortable home in a quiet neighborhood closer to Madison's school and friends, a place with a yard where they could plant a garden. Life became centered not on boardrooms, but on bike rides, homework help, bedtime stories, and slowly, carefully, building a father-daughter relationship grounded in love and shared memories of Anna. Madison blossomed, her initial quietness giving way to the bright, curious energy Blake had first glimpsed. The star-shaped birthmark was no longer a symbol of mystery and loss, but a visible link connecting father and daughter. Blake established the Madison Star Foundation, funding educational programs for children in foster care and supporting investigative journalism initiatives, with Isabel Rossi joining its board. David Lee remained Blake's trusted personal lawyer and friend. Blake himself found a new passion, launching smaller-scale green technology ventures from his home office, finding more fulfillment in focused innovation than in empire management. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Blake and Madison were flying a kite in a local park, its tail dancing against the bright Texas sky. Madison's laughter echoed, free and joyful. Isabel Rossi and David Lee, joining them for a casual picnic, watched from a nearby bench. He seems lighter, Isabel remarked to David. David nodded. He lost a piece of his company, maybe, but he found his family. Found himself, I think. Blake looked at Madison, her face upturned to the sky, full of pure happiness. The hollow ache he had carried for a decade was gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace and purpose. He hadn't just found his daughter. He had found his way back to himself, guided by an undeniable connection and the simple, powerful truth spoken by a little girl with a star on her neck.